Hello, and welcome to another Photography Club Network video. I'm your host, Daryl Briggs. Today we're going to be talking about file types, specifically JPEG file types and RAW file types. A lot of times I get asked questions such as which file type should a photographer be shooting in, or perhaps their camera will record both a JPEG and a RAW file. Should they shoot with both? So hopefully this video, if you're having some of those questions, will help you answer those questions that you may be having. First of all, let's talk about the file types a little bit. A RAW file is 100% of the information that your camera and your camera's sensor can capture. All of the information that the software engineers and the designers of your camera, when it takes a picture and it writes a file, it's going to give you everything it can with a RAW file type. This is good because you have all of that information, but the downside is it creates much bigger files. So a JPEG file, on the other hand, it'll take certain bits of information and stuff and discard them and compress the file down. So the good news, or the good part about that, is it saves a lot of space, but on the other hand, you lose some of that information that you could be capturing and you can never get it back. Once it's written in JPEG, the information is gone because the file is compressed. Okay. Now, a JPEG, you might want to shoot in JPEG if you can. Let's say you're on a trip, you have limited number of media cards and no way to download your images. In other words, you have to keep them on the media cards that you have. As you're progressing through your trip, if you're shooting in RAW, you might use up all of your media space, all of your card space before your trip is over. So you could switch to JPEG, or you could shoot in JPEG, and then you could at least get through your entire trip. If you're going to be able to make it the whole way, you might want to go ahead and stay in a RAW file format and capture all of the information. Now, one thing you do need to do, if you say, well, yeah, hard disk space on my computer, memory cards, that's not an issue. And relatively speaking, hard disk space is cheap nowadays. You can buy hard drives for relatively inexpensive amounts of money that, you know, are huge in size, that retain a lot of information. But on the other hand, you need to make sure, though, that once you get them on your computer, that you have software that can view RAW files. Almost every program out there can view JPEG files, but not every program can view RAW files. The good news is there's quite a bit more nowadays software programs that will view RAW files, but there's still some out there that won't. So take a few pictures sometime with your camera and record some RAW images and put them on your hard drive, and make sure the software that you use to view and edit and manipulate images, or whatever you do with your photos, make sure that it will view your RAW files. If it doesn't, there's really no need to even consider RAW until you make a change with your software. Now, and while we're talking about software, periodically you may need to upgrade your software. This is because the manufacturers of the camera, they'll periodically upgrade or rewrite the way that they record their images when they're shooting them in RAW. Okay, so you may be recording in RAW and things are going fine and you can view your image. Well, then all of a sudden one day you either get a newer camera, or maybe perhaps you upload some or update your firmware on your camera, something to that extent. And what you're doing is, if your manufacturer has changed the way that they record RAW images, your software may not view that, may not be able to view those RAW images. If that's the case, then you're going to have to contact your software company and see if they've got a newer update to your software that you can update and then be able to view the newer RAW files. If you shoot for clients are going to need files in JPEG. They're not familiar with RAW. They don't really need them in RAW because you're not going to ask them to manipulate the images or anything like that. So clients are going to need to have JPEG images. So you may shoot and record it in RAW, but then you're going to have to convert those to JPEG for your clients. It's not that difficult of a task with most software programs out there these days. Lightroom does it. That's the program I use. Aperture does it real easily. There's a world of software programs that will convert a file from RAW to JPEG. Lastly, I kind of want to talk about, before I talk about both, manipulating your images. If you manipulate your images in any type of post-processing environment, i.e. you use Photoshop or some other program to adjust your images and things, if you record in RAW, if you capture your images in RAW, you'll be able to do any manipulation to a greater extent than you can in JPEG. This gets back to the fact that a JPEG tosses out some information. Once that information is tossed out and you don't have it, it's kind of hard to manipulate it. You can't do it. If you have the total file, the RAW file, then you can manipulate the data because you have all of the data. So keep that in mind. If you do a lot of photo manipulation and such like that, you may want to shoot in RAW. Now, one other thing I'll caution people on is sometimes people say, well, you know what, I don't do any photo manipulation, so I don't really care, I'm just going to shoot in JPEG. The one argument I might say you want to consider, what if you go out sometime and you're shooting your grandbaby's first birthday, or maybe you're shooting a real important wedding for someone, and in the middle of one of those two events, you accidentally change your white balance, you bump it to a different setting, or some other camera setting. Some of the times when you're in RAW, you can manipulate that and change it back to what it should be, whereas in JPEG, you might be able to adjust it some, but not to the extent of RAW. So even if you don't do a lot of post-processing or any post-processing, you still might want to consider shooting in RAW for some events, because then if you make that mistake, even if you don't know how to change it, you might be able to give it to someone and let them change your camera setting and such like that with the RAW image. Lastly, shooting in RAW plus JPEG. I've never really come up with a good scenario where that would be that you would want to do that. Then you're just writing two files to your media card. Number one, that's going to take up even more space. Number two, it's going to take up even longer time to write the files to the card, so you're not going to be able to shoot as quick. About the only time I could think of that I might say, yeah, shoot in JPEG plus RAW, is you go to an event where you're going to have to download and give your client some JPEG images right then and there, but you want to also retain the RAW files for yourself for later on. So you give your client, you do the event, you download the JPEG images, say, here you go, client, here are your images, but you've still got them in RAW format so that you go home, if your client calls you up and says, hey, can you change this image up a little, or can you adjust this image or that image, you'll have it and stuff like that. That's about the only time I'd recommend shooting in JPEG and RAW at the same time. So that's it. I hope this has helped you a little bit determine if you want to shoot in RAW or JPEG. Don't forget to always check out the photographyclubnetwork.com website, and also check your local meetup group for events and things that are happening locally. And I hope to see you at an event soon. Thank you very much.